I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. No, again, thank you very much for this invitation. This is an absolute honor. I'm very familiar with a number of the organizations involved here, and and am always happy to be in some sort of engaged work and struggle and support. And of course, anytime I can be of some help, I'm happy to be around, and we can build as much as we all have time and energy and bandwidth for. So I agree. I hope this is the beginning of many more interactions, and one day, yeah, I would also have liked to be there in person. It's been a while since I've been to Medgar Evers College. I always, of course, love revisiting the planet that is Brooklyn and New York. So it's you know. Just one other thing, just I am, if I heard correctly, I find it shocking and in some ways confusing that that anyone who would welcome Dr. Horne would find me somehow more radical or controversial. I'm far less accomplished, but certainly not, I would hope, and I don't think any more to the left than is Dr. Horne. So anytime I can be associated with some sort of controversy on that level, I suppose it's an honor as well. But I did just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit more about the conclusion, which we were asked to focus on primarily. And I'm glad we did, because it's been the conclusion that since I published the first edition has in many ways been the cause for some debate and controversy to a certain extent. Just reading quickly the abstract here, the from that chapter. The myth of the black buying power suggests often that public policy or politics are to be sublimated to the importance of economic development. As a result, significant damage is done to both an understanding of economics and to the development of strategies for addressing continuing inequalities. Public policy and politics, public policy and politics and political movements must be engaged at greater levels, making redistribution of created national wealth a priority, and efforts which focus primarily or exclusively on black capitalism, business, and buying power must be either abandoned entirely or redesigned within a more appropriate context or understanding of the relationship of public policy to matters often isolated as solely economic. So essentially, I'm just simply saying we're often told we got to get our money right before we get our politics right, and I'm arguing that that's the exact opposite. That there is no first getting our money right. There is no catching up, and that we should target our efforts at public policy and setting laws and regulations that say whatever wealth is created in this society should not require us to be brilliant business people or superbly financially literate, so-called, to get an appropriate share. What we should have is a public policy that redistributes the $25 trillion that is generated annually in this country as part of its GDP, which is a measurement of all the money spent on goods and services and all the wealth created from all of that, which is ultimately going to the handful of people that own the economy, the 800 people that are worth $6 trillion. And instead of us saying, why don't we redistribute some of that back to all of us who have helped already create that wealth, we're constantly told to chase after some mythological pool of resources that doesn't actually exist and cannot be used in the way that we are encouraged to believe it can. And that's part of the mythology, to distract us from radical political organization and movements, to distract us from an accurate understanding of how the economy works and our relationship to it, and to encourage us to spend as much of our imagination and brilliance in exactly the areas of struggle that will yield the least or fewest results. So in the conclusion, I write that I summarize here that the most immediate goal of this book has been to displace and permanently sever any conceptual relationship between buying power and liberation. So I absolutely want to get us away, or to the extent anyone associates this concept of buying power to liberation, to completely cut that there is no relationship between buying power and liberation. A secondary goal of the book has been to discourage any further distinguishing between economics and politics, and to again destroy this concept as much as possible that we can do one without the other, or that we can do economics first and then politics, and not recognize the role that politics and political power plays in determining what the economy looks like and where wealth is, how wealth is defined and where it's redistributed. And then a final goal of this book has been to encourage more critical investigation into existing class divisions and the role they play in the kinds of media and journalism which dominate most public spheres. In many ways, that's just my engagement, my new and limited engagement with a very old struggle, that within a Black community, there still needs to be a consideration of class, and that too often Black celebrity, bourgeois politics, capitalism, etc., all do everything to deny any class divisions with an almost exclusive focus on race, which then allows for a Black bourgeoisie to not only be established, but to go largely without criticism from within its own community. And I think that that's been a major problem here as well. Another point that I just wanted to highlight from the conclusion is, as I say here, persistent and worsening racial wealth and income disparities and the negative impact this increasingly has on Black consumption is being seen as a threat to the entire national economy. As discussed, Black buying power is not any real strength about Black people. It is a reflection of Black impact on producing wealth for the economy. So that was another point I wanted to reiterate in the book, in the conclusion here, that I hope that the book helps unveil the reality that buying power is, again, an attempt to measure how Black people can help the broader economy, which is owned by a handful of mostly white men who, and exclusively by this 1/10 of 1% that own the economy. That's all it is, and the myth is that the idea of buying power is itself a measurement of the potential for Black people to free themselves, and it's not, unless taken somewhat ironically, to understand that it is a measurement of how unfree we actually are. I did want to also highlight again that I do make some reference in the book to something that has in the conclusion that continues to play a factor in some of the response I've gotten and continue to get from the book, which is, so I cite what is described as the continued influence effect. And I summarize it in saying that in two experiments, we showed that pre-existing attitudes co-determine people's reliance on misinformation. That is, people are more likely to use a piece of information in their reasoning when this piece of information is congruent with their attitudes and beliefs. Unlike some previous research, however, we found that the effectiveness of retractions of misinformation was not affected by attitudes. That is, people's attitudes did not affect the extent to which a retraction reduced their reliance on a piece of attitude-relevant misinformation. To reconcile this finding with existing literature, we suggested that the effectiveness of attitude-incongruent retractions will depend on whether or not accepting the retraction will induce a requirement to change the underlying attitude. When accepting a retraction does not require change in underlying attitudes, it will not be rejected for attitudinal reasons. When a retraction does challenge people's underlying attitudes, they will resist it. Simply put, if you present people with information that challenges their already constructed reality, they will resist it, even if they acknowledge that what you're saying is true. And this has been something that I found fascinating. And even when I put this in the book, I underestimated the extent to which I would be talking about what I would end up experiencing as a result of the book coming out. The arguments against the work have had almost, I'm only saying almost performatively, performatively, because I can't think of any instance where a criticism of the book has had something to do with what the book's argument actually is or isn't. Even when there's been criticism of the book that I don't offer a solution, what is really being said here is that the solution I offer would require people to change their attitudes. So rather than saying, here's the solution he's suggested, and then taking it at its face value and determining whether it's a sound argument, it's simply dismissed, because any acknowledgement of what I'm arguing here would require many to change their underlying attitudes, which themselves have been constructed largely by a counterinsurgent, psychologically warfare situated media environment that has, by design, over the last 150 years, wanted to consciously reconstruct all people in this country along the lines of consumption, settler colonial identity structures, and so on. And yeah, so I just find that to be somewhat fascinating and interesting, and an ongoing struggle. That is that even as I acknowledge it here in the book that I'm going to be facing an uphill battle, I admit I was a little bit naive to the extent to which it was going to play out in real time. Part of what I try to identify here in the conclusion, also to help reconcile some of these contradictions, is that the Black press that is, as I said a moment ago, itself operating on those pre-existing constructed concepts of society and the economy, and then also working within a commercial media environment dependent upon ad revenue, that is the Black press themselves, end up not only misrepresenting a lot about the economy in an attempt to promote an idea that Black people have more money to spend than is the case in reality, in order to attract ad revenue, but that general frame or worldview approach, again, socially constructed on the realities of settler colonialism and capital narrative layered hierarchies. Well, as I said here, the Black press almost never includes in its work histories of socialism, communism, pan-Africanism, anti-imperialism, and radical nationalism. So what we end up getting in many of the commercial Black presses that target Black audiences, and by this I mean not only the traditional written forms, but podcasts, YouTube channels, et cetera, that operate on that same Black capitalist commercial press logic. What ends up happening is we get versions of Black history that emphasize Black capitalism, entrepreneurialism, that promote the mythology of buying power to attract white ad revenue, which is, again, part of the contradiction here. And then it ends up fostering more confusion among Black audiences as to the extent of the problem and what can be done about it. And then I almost kind of want to write a third edition of the book that focuses just on my experiences with the Black press, as they have engaged me, to an extent they've engaged me on this issue, which even since the publication of the second edition has taken on new forms. That is, in some cases wanting to cover the argument, but then almost invariably having to come back to some support for the mythology that I'm critical of. It's on one hand fascinating, on another hand very disturbing in terms of, again, what I'm arguing is the impact of all of that. I also just try to remind at the end that what is the material condition that we're engaged in here, where I just remind folks of as I quote here, the share of the total income accounted for by the top 1% of earners has doubled from 8% in 1979 to 18% in 2015, while the share of the top 0.1% has quadrupled from 2% to almost 8% over that same period. So, I mean, if we think about 0.1% of the population having 8% of the total income in this country, where this is how you end up in a situation where 800 people are worth $6 trillion, and most of us don't have, as was reported recently, $400 for an emergency in our accounts. And then as I end the book, it's making a reference to what is projected to be the $25 trillion gross domestic product in this country, which is again a measurement of all the wealth created by the exchange of goods and services and the selling of labor. And in other words, all that we have already done in paying our bills and buying our food and going shopping and whatever we're doing is creating said to be $25 trillion a year. And instead of developing public policy and movements that would target that, we're encouraged back to the intellectual landscape created by white settler colonial capitalist conservatives. And that's what I'm attempting to help smash. So, all right, let me stop there, and hopefully we have plenty of time for Q&A, and I'm happy to drill down on any particular point made and any other thing, and any other questions. So, but again, thank you all very much for the invitation, and I absolutely look forward to a build. Well, Bernays, he started earlier, but he was primarily he sort of came into form after the Second World War. And Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, famously, who used Freud's work on mass psychology in advertising, did a lot of work to help the business community maintain order and control. And he wrote famously in, I believe, his book in 1920 called Propaganda. He said, where the book opens by him describing the, quote, invisible government that rules the country, largely by setting what are considered to be the ranges of options people think that they have. And making the point similar, somewhat to say, the ruling elite can promote presidents in the way that they promote soap. After the Second World War, Bernays was mostly credited with promoting the phrase public relations as a way of cleansing the term propaganda, which took on a negative connotation, being associated with the Nazis during the Second World War, and not wanting to stop propagandizing. Again, Bernays is a huge proponent of it. He wanted to give it a better brand, so he came up with public relations. And this is why today I always argue that public relations, branding, marketing, strategic communication, mass communication, psychological warfare, information warfare, counterinsurgency, these are all euphemisms for more or less the same process and the same purpose. And so that's what Bernays was attempting to do. And Democracity was his concept of, at one point, I think it was a World Fair he wanted to do this with, but to create both a model of using a city model, if I remember correctly, but using the fair to model how American capitalism and city and urban development could unite the concepts. Like, he was using this as a mechanism of post Second World War, unifying the concepts of capitalism, freedom, and democracy, so that this is part of what I keep forgetting their name, but the authors of the book called The Big Myth, and what Elizabeth Fons Wolfe in her earlier work on Selling Free Enterprise talk about. In there, after the Second World War, there was this massive effort by the corporate community to rebrand, recapture, reconquer America, in their language, to create the narrative and the imagery and the symbolism and the propaganda that promotes free market fundamentalism as a solution. So Bernays was sort of an early purveyor of that, trying to say that if to promote this idea to the world, now that the United States had become the singular hegemon after the Second World War, to promote to the world that if you to be powerful, to be truly free, you need to be involved in capitalism, what America calls democracy, and then to falsely wed those concepts, so that to this day we struggle to have discussions with people. Socialism can be democratic and is in fact democratic. Communism is in fact a democratic redistribution of the wealth. It's a democratic control of the economy. But the mythology, that the propaganda in this country that has been intense, well-researched, studied, resourced for at least 100 years now, has been designed to shape public opinion and to redefine people's concepts in what others have called is this country's true religion, which is anti-communism, and to get everybody back onto some business model for success, and targeted specifically to Black people was this concept of Black capitalism, with the subsets of circulating dollars, buying power. Generational wealth is the catchphrase we hear today. These are all free market fundamental myths that have a lot of their foundation in the work of EdwardBernays and IvyLee and that group of propagandists of the mid 20th century. I think it's right to be concerned about the value of Black labor and what does that mean given Black people's relationship to the society, or what that means in terms of impacting Black people's relationship to this society. But I do struggle with the idea that there was ever a time when Black labor was appropriately respected at all. And to the extent that it had everything to do with why labor in general has been respected more or less at any given point in time. So if, Black labor was somewhat more respected when white labor was being sent off to war, in the same way as the case with white women. Black labor, of course, was welcomed when it was free and forced and had no rights. Black labor was really appreciated then. But my limited reading of the history of the labor movement and Black people's relationship to that, labor has never been respected, period, regardless of anybody's background. It has always had to fight for anything, including to this day for some basic minimum wage, which is itself at minimum $10 less per hour than it should be given rates of production and inflation and cost of living. So labor is never valued, Black, white, or other. Black people's labor, to the extent that technology shifts and jobs are exported or replaced by technology of one form or another, yeah, all labor is threatened, and Black people will be among the first to and most to suffer from it. But this is again why. So I think there is at least some room and logic. There's some room for, and there is logic in the claim that that there would be an intensification around the propaganda encouraging ownership and business, and while discouraging further labor organization, unionization, and similar efforts. So anyway, so the logically that would be the case. It makes sense that would be happening. And it's something that has been explicitly called for. Again, I target and focus most of my, in my work around the Nixon administration in that time period, and the explicit desire to move Black people away from radical politics and into Black capitalist endeavors. So if that was happening 50 years ago, 60 years ago, at the height of, or at a crescendo of Black political and radical organization, it absolutely makes sense that at a time where Black people are still struggling to find that level of sustained organized militancy, that the messaging would be increased to say, you don't need it. You need more financial literacy courses. You need more Democratic Party elected officials, or worse. In some cases, people are I just watched some podcasters I used to enjoy watching talk about, basically praising Trump at this point. My point being that all of this is being done to discourage what should be the case: more leftward collective movement building and radical organization. So I don't know if I fully addressed your question. I don't want to just keep rambling, and I'm happy to get a follow-up or a response or even a criticism. But it absolutely is the case. We should stop praising the boss and blaming the consumer and diminishing consumption when consumption is 70% of this economy and should be praised and should generate more wealth for those who do the consuming, or more benefits, I should say. No, thanks. I don't think much effort at all should be put on investment in land or any or cryptocurrency for sure. Definitely not that. And what I mean by that is that first of all, these are not the reasons why Black people are poor, and these are not the pathways to achieving some sort of parity or any form of liberation. I think 5 white men have more land in this country than all of the Black community combined. Black people have no access to the major manufacturing sectors of the economy. In other words, so what little bit of land Black people could get could not be turned into some wealth-producing, process that would benefit much of the Black community at all. Cryptocurrency is even worse, and I don't want to belabor the point too long, but it's a relative Ponzi scheme that has no value and no benefit whatsoever. And everyone, Black people in particular, should absolutely avoid cryptocurrency at all costs. Land at least exists. You can point to it and theoretically turn it into something. I'm just arguing against focusing on that because there's no land to buy, and there's no ability to invest in that land to turn it into something that would benefit many people, if anyone. So even, look at the struggles of the remaining Black farmers to this day. Black farmers are still dependent on public policy that determines what crops are supported, what taxes there are, what tariffs there are, obviously. What will be the value of the crop that they produce. They're often dependent on it's often determined for them what crops they can grow in the first place. So this idea that if we have land, we can do whatever we want with it and turn it into some sort of no. So in terms of overt, public, above board discussions, my argument is we should be developing new ways to radically engage electoral politics and to determine and to challenge those with whatever power to develop policy that redistributes wealth that, again, we've all already created. It shouldn't. I want to move us away as much as possible from this idea that there is something we are not doing that is causing this inequality, or there's something that we are doing to ourselves that is causing this inequality. And I want us to get back to discussions of policy and political power and the ability to say, look, I don't need to be a great business person, and I don't need to own all this land. I can't compete with McDonald's. I can't compete with Walmart. No one, even white people, even in the white world, they can't compete with these dominant monopolies. So, and as I often joke, the greatest critic of capitalism was a 19th century white man in Europe who was talking almost exclusively about white people in a white context. And even there, capitalism was shown to not be something that could solve the problems of class inequality. So why would we think that a colonized, enslaved, oppressed, group of African descended people anywhere in the world could engage in that process and overturn all of these centuries of abuse? So I want us to focus not on can we buy land and turn it in, which we all know, most of us know, what land are we going to buy? Most of us are not in any condition or geographical space to buy land. So the issue is, I live in this country, like I live in Maryland. There's no land for me to go buy. There's no, even if I had the money to buy it, but I live in a state where I do pay taxes, I go to work, I buy expensive coffees, and I bought a microphone and a laptop and in my little fake fireplace and my Xbox and my TV. I've already purchased all that stuff. I pay taxes. I buy groceries. I've already produced for the economy. I'm a consumer in a 70% consumer-based economy. The problem is 0.1% have 8% of all that income. 800 people. And I say to my classes, we have a small, at Morgan State, 10,000 person stadium. And I say, take that 10,000 person stadium and put 800 people in it. And even in that teeny tiny stadium, you would barely notice 800 people were in there. And yet they have $6 trillion. 800 people got $6 trillion. That's ridiculous. So what I'm saying is we need movements that go after that. I don't want to keep telling other poor people and middle class people to go do something that those who have all this wealth never did. That's not what they did, by the way. And that's something, by the way, that I don't talk about in the book that we should just briefly mention as a reminder. I don't think everybody here needs this, but the wealth in this country was, and in all Western societies, in fact, but in this country in particular, the wealth in this country was generated through genocidal theft of land, centuries of enslavement and exploitation, Jim and Jane Crow, labor struggles, immigration struggles, abuses, war, theft. That's how they've made their wealth. And then they want to turn around and tell us to start a small business and buy some land and invest in some crypto. It's absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, I just did the look, what was it? 0.3% of Bitcoin wallets have 93% of all the Bitcoin. So it's just like land. There ain't no Bitcoin to buy. All the blockchain technology, all the main exchanges in the crypto world, they're all owned by a handful, the mining, all owned by a handful of already billionaires. And now you got Citibank and JP Morgan getting more involved. What are black people going to do here? There is no Bitcoin to buy. Every time you invest in Bitcoin, all you're doing is increasing the value of the coin that someone else already owns. So it's a complete scam. Yeah. So sorry. Let me just stop there. I do see a quick question in there about ClaudAnderson. If I could just say very quickly, no disrespect to ClaudAnderson, but a lot of his arguments around economics and what black people should be doing is misguided and based on some of these false claims around entrepreneurialism and circulating dollars. So he's got a one of the problems that still exists is that this idea that if you engage in socialism or critiques of capitalism, that you're doing something white or Marxist or whatever, and that's white. And Anderson gets too much into that for me, which is why some of his arguments around that he's been making lately, over the last few years, in fact, around what black people can do economically is just entirely wrong. I've done a few videos about it, but yeah, I'll just stop there. My point about the problem of purchasing land is one example, is that one, there's no land to purchase. So that's sort of my point. Whether we're doing it communally with an idea of food security as opposed to wealth, as you suggest, it doesn't matter whether we want to engage in some purely capitalist exploitative enterprise or we want to do something that saves the entire community. There's no land. And then what land exists, even if you want to do something communal, especially if you want to do something communal, it becomes even more difficult because how much land could any of us buy that could be with enough productive capacity to turn that land into wealth producing or food producing, resource producing for how many people? How many crops could we buy or produce? Again, my comrade at Black Liberation Media, TooBlack, has pointed out in a recent piece about the supply chain, which is very relevant here. If we have the land, we would still need to buy the seeds. What, from Monsanto? That again, this, where are we going to get the seeds? Where are we going to get the investment for the machinery? It's not going to be a black manufacturer. So we're going to be buying John Deere fat tractors and supporting the company that bulldozes Palestinian homes and kills people. What do we don't own trucks. We don't own shipping, to send products. So we would have to still engage we would need investment in venture capital and banking, investment from whom? So that's my point. So the food deserts that exist, as you point out accurately, in black communities, they're not there because there's not land. The parts of DC where I've even done some work historically around the existence of food deserts in Washington DC is not because there's no land or land that could be purchased by black people and turned into something helpful isn't being done. No, there's no land to buy. So what we would need is public policy and political movements that say, which is really my point, which is really to say, we shouldn't have to go out and find land to produce food to feed ourselves in a country that throws more food away every day just to elevate and sustain certain stock prices that would why should we do that? We should be engaged in organized movements that say, we're here. We live in this part of the city and we're in a food desert. I shouldn't have to figure out how none of us should have to figure out or be in charge of or be responsible for or the success of or the failure of any operation to bring food. No, this is a governmental public policy issue. Put a grocery store over here. Put an affordable food place over here. Make sure that the food that ends up in that, because I remember work I was doing like 20 years ago, we were showing how even if it was a mainstream, chain a grocery store, the ones in the black community were getting older food and higher price foods. It's the same store. Why is the same product more expensive in a black community than on the rich white side of the city? So, but that's a public policy thing. That's not a land thing. And that's the point I'm getting at. There's just not, there is no land. There is no manufacturing. And in fact, as I think I cited in the book, Elora Derenoncourt's paper that I think I'm mispronouncing her name, but she did the research for the National Bureau of Economic Research that shows that there is no catching up. Because of the starting of enslavement, black people in terms of wealth can only at best be expected to get to a 6-to-1 ratio in terms of wealth compared to whites. She showed that even if you start from 1865 and say after there's no more slavery, no more Jim and Jane Crow, no more segregation, no more unequal lending, no more redlining, if you just took everything out and everybody was fully equal from 1865 on, because of the accumulated wealth prior to that through enslavement, black people could at that point only at best get to a 3-to-1 ratio. So there is no catching up. This society is not currently arranged in any way for anybody to do anything. The most financially literate, business savvy, brilliant community could not do anything better than black people are doing in this country right now. What needs to happen is political movements, public policy that redistributes the wealth that we are all already creating. That is the only above board, legal, overt solution that I think any of us should be ever considering. again, similar to my argument, consumer spending is a measurement of where of what people have to spend on what they're allowed to buy. So it's not a measurement of income. It's not a measurement of wealth. I mean, Louise Story and Ebony Reed just published a book this past year, 15 cents on the dollar. Black wealth is still headed to zero by 2050. So all the real measurements of, black people are still twice double the unemployment of whites. So focusing on where people spend what little they have or what little they're able to go into debt. Like, we can get a credit card and go into debt to buy tennis shoes, but you can't get a credit card and go into debt buying Amazon or land, in other words. So we just like the colonial traditions spoken about by Fanon and others, people who are colonized spend money on what they have access to. We have access to overpriced coffee and hair and teeth and rims and clothes and food. And so that's what we shop. That's what we spend money on. But it's not a measurement of power, obviously, and it's not a measurement of wealth, obviously, or should be obvious. So we should only be focused not on GDP, which is itself not a measurement of inequality within a community. We should only be focused on measurements of, trained economists and honest economists talk only about income and wealth. And that's how should we, and all those indicators show black people trending ever downward. So that's where we should find our focus. It shouldn't be on how many billionaires we have, how many celebrities we have, how many black elected officials we have. It shouldn't matter. None of that should have anything to do with anything. The collective condition of the people should be is the only thing that should be considered. And those data points are just as horrendous as ever. Because remember, just quickly, consumer spending is not to help people understand their relationship to the economy. Consumer spending and data analysis is to help businesses and to help the government understand how the economy is doing, how to target their ad revenue. And remember, whenever you hear how well or not the economy is doing, that is not a measurement in anything for you. It's a measurement of how it's a measurement of the condition of those who own the stock and own all the wealth. And again, that's it. I think I talk about in my book. It's somewhere around 1% own more than half of all the stock, and I think it's like 83%, 10% own 93% of all the stock in this country. So again, just like land, stock, Bitcoin, blockchain, there's nothing to buy or to invest in that's going to overturn these relationships. And can I just jump in real quick so I don't forget, and then and please come back and finish the rest. But just quickly, what ends up happening, what you talked about there. So going from the Atlanta conference to today, and hearing how old these arguments are around black business and black capitalism. What gets left out of those histories are some of the changes that take place. For instance, you mentioned DuBois. DuBois at one point is a believer in the buying power mythology. At one point, he is a believer in the efficacy of black business and co-ops. But at the end of his life, he comes back to say that they cannot work. That for them to work, they need massive government involvement, which is socialism, and left to their own devices, they are gobbled up and destroyed by the broader capitalist economy. So that's the point that is frustrating for me, that even when people want to praise today cooperatives and suggest that they're a pathway to healing or some sort of holdover before revolution, they leave out the fact that Du Bois among others, became a critic of the potential for co-ops to address the problem, in part because of what I just said. So anyway, sorry, I just wanted to quickly address that point. Yeah. Can I just address that one before I forget and come back to, because I don't want to forget. I have a terrible memory. So just quickly, the media environment has always been constructed for psychological warfare, consumer, settler, colonial, capitalist purposes. So there's always more to say about that. But there's just given what is the case about the history of the media environment in this country. There is no such thing as entertainment. There is no such thing as news. It is almost exclusively and entirely public opinion management, perception management, as they call it, and construction of our cognitive infrastructure, as Jen Easterly, formerly of the NSA, says, now working for Homeland Security and cybersecurity. This is how they approach our media environment. So it's always been designed to do this. To your point, and to Dinde's, if I'm saying that correctly, question about the black media environment of today, it is a construct for the same political purpose. So, just quickly, one of the core features of this country's media environment is that advertising determines content, not the ownership, not the race, class, gender, sexual orientation, political persuasion of the ownership. It is advertising. So now it's been automated in some ways through the algorithms of YouTube, et cetera, Spotify, et cetera. But it's all designed to benefit what advertisers want, the people who spend about $600 billion every year on advertising, and that's what all these commercial media outlets are chasing after. So to chase after them, they have to even unconsciously produce a content that's going to appease that advertising community. So when you're talking about, as was raised in the chat, earn your leisure, Black Hollywood, whatever, these spaces are all, whether you're a celebrity in Black Hollywood or doing a podcast that promotes a Black excellence Hollywood, Black capitalist bourgeois fantasy like Earn Your Leisure, you are you are working at the behest, and you are beholden to a white corporate advertising and affluent white consumer base. So whether you're producing movies, Black nominally or otherwise, or producing Black media nominally or otherwise, the target audience are white corporate advertisers and a white affluent audience. Even so the extent that Black people love what we and anyone else does is almost irrelevant. If the advertisers don't support it, if the white affluent audience doesn't support it, it's only going to be so successful and made so relevant. So that alone automates, in many ways, the auto-colonialism some of my colleagues have written about over the years, that again automates the process and makes it unconscious even, and makes it become the water McLuhan described of our media environment that we know was not discovered by the fish, because an all-pervasive environment is always beyond perception. So that's why, and that's how it is connected to my buying power argument, that the commercial press demand to chase after advertising revenue forces a content that misrepresents the condition, wittingly or not, of Black people to Black audiences, and continues to cause all this confusion. All right, sorry, please finish, and I hope I addressed that part of your question. I almost don't know that such a thing is possible in this world. And this is why I still struggle with Huey Newton's intercommunalism approach, that the world is interconnected. There is no going back to a situation where you can live in some sort of exclusivity and self-dependence and autonomy that I think is often fantasized about. So I don't know exactly how that would even look in this, no one on the planet, the richest of the rich, the wealthiest of the wealthy, the most powerful people on the planet, do not live in a condition or a situation where they are living independent of other people and other communities and other countries. They are living, what they've done is created a situation where they're living in dependence on the rest of us and in total control over the rest of us. And that's the part I'm trying to advocate that we overthrow. So that's why in terms of public discussions on cameras that are recorded, all I can think of is to say we need to organize political movements and political organizations that seek redistribution of the wealth that's already created. From there, I don't know what's possible, but we have to start with where we are, I think, and say there is nowhere to go. Like those of us here in the United States, there is no land to occupy where we would be independent and free of whites and safe from them. So, and there's no path to that doesn't, I think, necessitate a massive revolutionary change to white America itself. So I don't see how a United States of America can exist and some newly created sovereign, autonomous Black or African community could be free. I don't see where frankly, the United States as is currently constructed doesn't allow for any country currently existing or in the future to be quote unquote free and autonomous. So, but I don't want the limits of my imagination or analysis to hold anybody back, which is why I keep wanting to come back to that. All I'm really arguing in this Buying Power book is that Black capitalism doesn't work, that buying power is itself a myth. And I've proven that. Like this is not my speculation. This is I've proven that buying power as we understand it is absolute mythology. So if we can just get past some of that, maybe my shortcomings and failures in explaining a solution or coming up with an answer to this that's sufficient will be overcome. I'm sorry I don't have a better response and maybe a more optimistic response than that. But that is what I think. Thank you. So I think that these logics of mutual aid and community farms and others ideas that you mentioned, the reason they persist is because I think the reason they persist is because all the forms of more radical methods of achieving liberation or equality or freedom have been discouraged or omitted or destroyed. And that there's been a dominance over the last 50 years at least of the nonprofit industry and its influence over political organization. The Democratic Party has a negative influence over grassroots political organization. The media environment I've been describing plays its role in limiting what are perceived as the options for response. So well-meaning people looking to do something are going to be easily drawn to these more liberal, neoliberal, nonprofit-supported types of ventures. And that's all fine and good. I just think that, well, to the extent that people are looking for some way to get started in some sort of response to these horrific conditions. But the reality is that those are not going to solve the problem. And they are limited. And that's why the Black Panther Party referred to these kinds of projects as survival programs pending revolution. And they also had a certain political education and analysis that enveloped that work that I don't think exists today in the same way. So it's one thing to do liberal work with a more politicized understanding of that work and the limitations of that work, than going into that work thinking this is a viable actual solution. And that's why I'm just trying to remind and encourage that we move beyond those imposed limitations on what we think is possible and what we think is in fact the problem, in fact, and then open up some interpretive lenses and frames that will expand what I would hope would be the more radical forms of our organized response. And I'm always easily reached. I'm not hard to find, so I'm happy to come back and do more as well. It's just like we don't have to feel like everything has to be done today, but just put that out there. But yes, Go ahead, please. Well, one reason why I think that the whole issue around Target and DEI took off is because it's a very safe, liberal, black bourgeois, capitalist, entrepreneurial form of struggle to engage that is easily made popular by some of the more reactionary figures, I think, in the black community. Because what was the whole effort around Target? First of all, as my homegirl Renee Johnston showed in her work on her show Saturdays with Renee, and I hope people tune in to Black Liberation Media on Saturdays, if not in more, for that show and more. But what she showed in looking into the whole Target situation was that I believe it was only there was only 3% more hires. So wait a minute. Let me get this. I might not have the numbers exactly right, but the point that she was getting at was that the DEI initiative at Target only ended up resulting in a 3% increase in hiring of non-white folks at the board level. But the amount of non-white folks hired at the average worker level actually went down during their time, during their initiative. So one of the reasons why the initiative was promoted was because, as Renee's research points to, the DEI initiative at Target and elsewhere really only benefits the black elite, the black bourgeoisie, the handful of black executives, the handful of so-called of black so-called white collar workers. So again, as I pointed to already with some of the trending and consistent numbers around income and wealth, DEI did nothing to improve that. So, but it becomes an easy thing for the black elite to promote, to falsely reinscribe themselves as an acceptable leadership at a time of turmoil, for them to turn around and say, no, don't shop at Target. While, by the way, never saying anything about Costco, which was actually undergoing a labor strike or labor strife as workers at Costco were trying to unionize and organize for better wages and better treatment at that monopolist outlet. But instead of black leaders and black media and black people being encouraged to join that labor struggle as part of a broader effort, they're encouraged to simply boycott a handful of stores. To what end? To what end? Again, there was no call for an increased minimum wage, increased hiring of more workers. There was no call for a redistribution of Target's billions back to the community. Like none of these like things that we should be advocating for. It was none of that. It was just simply let's do something that gets some more black elites hired. And so, yeah, it becomes something very easy. And then to my point about the media environment, this is a relatively algorithmic friendly effort, because it narrowly focuses on race as the question around conditions of labor, and even more narrowly encourages a particular response by black people as a result. And so to me, it's perfect for a media environment like this that is forced in some way to engage some kind of response to the horrific conditions it helps promote. Yeah. So I hope I got all to all that the question was asking, but yeah, that's why I try to sometimes cut off and get to the question quickly, because I don't always remember everything that was asked. But yeah. Yeah, so I don't think that there was a question there, but I absolutely agree that, and I'm not sure if that was meant as a response to something I said earlier. I don't know that I said anything to contradict that point, but I agree. The black labor force is constantly manipulated to negatively impact not only the black community but the rest of the labor force in relation. And then I also agree, that was sort of the point I was getting at, that the whole buying power black capitalist mythology is meant in part, or works in effect in part, to bring Black people out of an appropriate relationship and participation in the labor struggle, that should be the place where most Black people put their overt, public, legally sanctioned work, as opposed to the fantasies and mythologies around circulating dollars and being more financially literate and more responsible and mature with what money we do have, or certainly, instead of, in other words, we're constantly being encouraged to be more entrepreneurial as opposed to more involved in a labor struggle, which is what I think is absolutely appropriate. So. But yeah, no, I don't know if you wanted, if there was more or something, but yeah, I agree with what you were saying. Yeah. Yeah. No, I just wasn't sure. I didn't take it. I don't want to, it's a little bit difficult to catch everything in this mediated situation, but I took it. Yeah. I don't have any, in other words, to the extent that you're asking me a question, yes, the Black labor force is to this day. So to try to blend the two questions as I remember them, part of what I was responding to earlier was to say that, yes, as Black labor is variously needed while never being properly respected, it is at times and often increasingly abused and exploited. And that even at times, especially at times. So, for instance, just as a quick example, I'm playing a very small and supportive role in trying to work with people here in the state of Maryland to get collective bargaining rights for faculty, for all faculty, as is the case with public workers in the state. One of the responses we're getting from even the Democratic Party is that, of course, it's a budget crisis. The state is losing $700,000 a day because of the shutdown. There's so many other issues that the fight for collective bargaining rights for all faculty is just not seen as important by the Democratic Party leadership of the state, which is the dominant party in the state. And my response to that was, well, at a time when there are less resources to work with, at a time when there is more perhaps conflict between labor and employers and bosses, that more should be done to protect labor. More should be done to encourage that workers and working people are protected, have safety nets, and benefit from whatever resources do exist. So all that to say, I absolutely agree that even at a time where Black labor may not be as valued to the extent it ever is as at another time, that's when Black people need to be more aggressive in organizing for policy that redistributes what resources do exist back to the people that actually need them and have already helped to produce them. So, yeah, I hope that addresses the question and conveys my agreement with your sentiment. So real quick, before you bring the question, I just want to say quickly, I'm happy to do that. In fact, in a month, I have to resubmit a chapter on the Black capitalist narrative for this other book project. And what I'd like to propose now, if you all would be, is that when I submit that, I send a copy to you all, and we have that be the basis of the next conversation, because I think that will help address some of the questions or issues you just raised in that. And if you're all open for that, give me a couple weeks, and we can build again just on that. But yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. So first, I encourage everybody to pay attention to my comrades, Erica and Amber, on their podcast, Brokish, which does air on Black Liberation Media, and to future Dr. Erica Brown's work on financial literacy. I've done a couple videos on it. We've done a couple interviews with her about it on my show, on Saturdays with Renee, and on Brokish. So I encourage people to check that out as well, to help them, to help everyone learn a little bit more about the history and the use and definition of financial literacy, because it's scandalous. So the only way I've ever been able to do it, and I admit it doesn't go well 100% of the time, is when I'm trying to engage Black entrepreneurs who I believe are honestly interested, they're not just looking to grift off of the Black community or become just Black bourgeois capitalists, whatever, adventurers. When I believe that, that they're being sincere, I just invite them to offer up the citations and the data that they are working from that shows that Black businesses help the community. And to your point about the method, my point about the crisis of methodology, I found that to be somewhat effective, because without me having to say much or to invite hostility or to even get into my own politics, it forces them to confront the fact that they have none. That is, there is no data that shows accurately that Black entrepreneurialism benefits the Black community. In fact, quite the opposite. That bit of research I supported that cited this point that I raise all the time, that from 1992 to 2012, Black people created over 2 million businesses in the United States. And their capture of the national sales revenue went down from 1% to like 0.3%. Or 5%, 0.5%. The point being, the creation of business not only does it not even increase sales access to national sales revenue, but it doesn't do anything to help the overall community. And today, I think there's not even 170,000 Black-owned businesses left, most of which hire one employee, which is usually the owner themselves, and most of them don't pay an employee that they do have more than the national average for employment. So this idea that Black businesses help the community is demonstrably false. And that's not my opinion. That's not my bias. That's not me being mean. It's just a fact. So I just asked them, where's your data on that? Because again, it's fine. If I'm down with it. I hate work. I don't want to work for anybody. I love teaching. I love being in the classroom, but I hate my job. I don't want to have to work. But so I get it when people say, I don't want to have to work for them or him or her, or I want to work for myself. I get it. So endeavoring to be an entrepreneur, endeavoring to own a business, endeavoring to be your own boss, and all of that, I'm down for all of that. I don't whatever, particularly African people, but whatever people can do to make it through this unnecessarily harsh life without having to spend most of it working at some job they hate for pay that is insufficient and benefits that don't benefit, I'm all for it. My only issue is that if the claim is business will free us, Black capitalism will free us, financial literacy will free us, that's has to be aggressively challenged. So I don't know the exact way to do it. And this is why, in part, why I wrote this book, to give others some ammunition to carry on these conversations with love and support and comrade, whatever. But to say, look, the data, it's just data. You can't capitalist your way out of a problem created by capitalism. So especially when you're Black, and especially when you're coming out of histories of the most oppressive forms of exploitation known to humankind. So I don't know, but that's the only time I've ever seen anything be effective. What is your evidence for business solving the problem? Show it. And they don't have it. And then you could see them start to fumble through the argument, and then you can provide them with the other data, and then maybe there will be some movement forward. But yeah, if Black people want to start their own businesses, especially if they want to do it with the idea that they're going to help the community and hire Black people and support this and that endeavor and this and that and the third, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Support it 100%. And I buy Black stuff all the time. Like I got my mug from Black Liberation Media, my shirt from Black. I got that's the other problem. There aren't that many products that we can actually get that are produced by, but all the traditional stuff, clothing, I got clothes and soaps and lotions, all my lotions, and my oils. I support Black business as much as I can. But we just have to be real about what is and is not the possibility from them. No, thank you all very much. In all sincerity, these are the greatest honors. I'm very sorry we couldn't get it so I could be there in person. I'm always down to build more and support the work you all are doing, however I can. And I really appreciate you all engaging my work. And I can't be more appreciative. So thank you. And anytime, I'm down to come back. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.